It's one of the things that I say to my clients all the time is like, you can't explain things to the dog. I mean, verbally,
Yeah.
right? And so the dog has to experience things and then experience like how their interaction with the environment created an outcome, and then they can make an informed choice, a more informed choice in the future. So the thing that I'm having trouble with is like, in all these situations, what is the dog picking up on that's informing their decision? And so like there's got to be some other context or something, you know, visual or something they smell or something they hear, right? Or whatever the case may be, that is happening in conjunction with, you giving them a pop on the check cord that you said earlier could mean a bunch of different things. But at some point, if they're coming to understand what you meant when your feedback was effectively the same, then that means there's got to be some other thing that's happening that's given them that like context clue.
So with the pop on the check cord,
Hmm.
like, so the information I'm specifically feeding the dog is like, the first thing I want it to mean is this predicts the flush of a bird. Now, there's a time where I'm going to teach you
Why do you want that?
because I want you to have intensity, right? So you're restrained. You can't move. If you believe you shouldn't move, and you're willing to restrain yourself. So I'm hopefully, at first, the first time I do it, like, we've come in and I've flushed a bird, I've restrained you, and I've asked you to stand still. I flushed a bird, I've restrained you, I've asked you to stand still. Like, there may be some feedback on the collar, but there's nothing succinct. There's nothing that says,
Yeah.
nope, stop. Because another thing, fundamentally, I believe stop and motion is much more important than duration and standing, right? And so I want to see a really hard stop and motion before I ever care about the way you look while you're standing, and standing with duration.
Hmm.
When your intensity will come because you're in the bird field and you're engaged in a forward way. So that's number, like, as long as you're there and I've restrained you and I've taught you you should stop in motion. And if you continue to move, I will ask for duration and you're willing to stop and stand, but you're not worried about me because I've done it in such a way that I'm not over influencing you. I'm not taking you out of the context. Um, then I can come in and you've already experienced flushes. You've already experienced not desiring to move forward because there's a consequence for it
Hmm.
after the flush. Now I can predict the flush. Now I can say, we're cruising tug flush, and the flush occurs, and you already have a history of restraining yourself and stopping and watching the bird away because it's better than the alternative of trying to chase the bird that you never smelled in the first place.
Hmm.
We're dealing in a different state of mind because you don't have a nose full of bird.
Hmm.
So I don't have quite as much arousal, and to me, it's a different behavior. Like, it's not pointing, right? You're just stopping and standing and watching a bird away. Um, and so now we do that enough times, and I go tug, and you go, oh, where's the bird? Now I've created a history of stopping hard. I've got not only a stop in motion, but a stop in motion that's not just disciplinary. It
Yeah.
predicts something that's somewhat reinforcing.
Yeah, so that's in our system. That's how we would prepare any application of pressure, right?
Yes,
Is to be a predictor of
it's a
reward
it's a
first.
very Nepopo-ish approach
Yeah.
to stop, but the thing is, it's a Nepopo-ish thing, but it's a bit of Popo knee because it's we're starting with the stop in action, the stop in motion.
Uh-huh.
And in my opinion, I can't negatively reinforce an inaction. I've got to punish your action. So there's like a subtle punishment that comes with stopping,
Hmm.
like, but there's some negative punishment and somewhat of a loss of a bird. Hopefully the loss of the bird, once a bird flushes, I mean, because at the end of the day, we should all be able to walk out with our bird dog, throw a pigeon, and they stop and watch it away.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, why are they doing that? Are they doing it because there's a consequence for continuing to move? Are they doing it because they're anticipating another flush if they do step? Because I do that a lot. There's always a second or third bird available. If you take a step, boom, you lose another bird. Um, or is it just the premac of if you do it right, there's an option for something beyond this,
Hmm.
you know? And so, but in my opinion, because I've taught you to respect the lead, because I've restrained you on the loss of that first pigeon, I'm not teaching you an action, I'm teaching you an inaction. There's a popo nay.
Okay.
If, or a po. You know, and maybe a nay, but it's not the same nay. You know, I mean, like there's, but all those things, all the principles are still at play. It's just things are happening very, uh, uh, in a way that's maybe less clear. Like you said earlier, I mean, it's not a clear signal because I'm not asking the dog to engage me and sit.
Do you feel like some of maybe the what I perceive as vagueness in the way that you're giving feedback or instruction to the dog through the check cord and the pinch collar is because your intent there is to, like, at some point the dog needs to kind of give themselves over to you a little bit in that work, and so like even though you want them forward, that they're cooperating with you, and that they're really having to work to kind of figure out what you want.
I think it's less about what I want and more about what the environment will provide. Like, so the way I think about a check cord is less about me. It's less about. I mean, obviously, I'm giving the dog feed. We're in a feedback loop, but there's a real important role that the check cord and the pinch collar play, which is just controlling the environment, right? And so, the environment's not going to allow you to chase. Your environment is here, like, and we're establishing a level of control. It's less about my influence, and maybe even I would prefer the dog see me as somewhat of a hindrance, but one that must be dealt with. Like, you know, because it's we're teaching these dogs to operate completely independently of us at the end of the day.
Hmm.
So the less influence I can impart early, the better off I am. Like, and I'm really hopefully tricking the dog into believing I'm not influencing it, but that the environment is what it is. And um, there are certain things that I will disallow, but I also don't. I really, really don't want you to take it personally.
Hmm.
I want you to just think of what is it that what can you do to get what you want out of this situation? How can you shed me a little more the next time around? You know, and hopefully you learn to have an appropriate interaction with this bird that carries over to other birds when you and I are not connected by a tether.
Hmm.
And then I tend to employ much more e-collar than your average West Gibbons person. Later on, that's getting into the chase stuff, but I still want as much or as little personal effect of any correction as I can possibly have. Now, there's times where I will intervene. If I get a crazy ass dog and I say, okay, now the moment I step in and I ask for obedience, now we're into obedience land. And the moment you're willful and disobedient, now we've gone from being in a bird setup to being in an obedience setup.
Hmm.
And we'll change the dynamic immediately right there. But if I can keep as little influence on the whole deal as possible and you start to act a certain way autonomously, then I've done what I came to do.
Hmm.
This is interesting because I'm opposite from you on a lot of things, and I think pointing is obedience, right? Because coming from a detection background and you as well, obedience to odor is a real thing,
It's an indication, right?
right? The one stimulus brings on the behavior.
Well, here's my thing, right? It's like if we talk about operant conditioning, and we're going to use the definition that I'm going to use for that is it's spontaneous behavior, or another way to say that is it's elicited behavior. The dog just does a thing, right? They fuck around and then they find out, right? So like they try something and then they receive some sort of result, and at that point now my behavior is not really elicited anymore, right? Now it's discriminate because now I know there's a thing that happens afterwards. So the first time it happened accidentally, kind of,
Yep.
right? And so for me, pointing starts out as elicited behavior, but it becomes discriminate.
This is why
Right.
I like incidental contacts
Yeah.
for my young dogs in the field. Right? That's elicited. It's you are in an environment. no matter how much of this I've done with you, when I take you out here and
You just discover that there's birds.
You just discovered that there's birds. And now hopefully if I've put the cart before the horse, which I did with Van, hopefully there's a history enough of interactions that are similar to this thing that they bleed into that thing.
Yeah.
And if they're not, then we go back and we deal with it at home.
Yeah.
But if I didn't, then we come do this. You have all this history of truly operant interactions with birds.
Yeah.
And now I get to come home and say, well, obviously we don't have wild birds anymore, but here's some things you can do better the next time around, only because I'm affecting the environment. One thing I believe wholeheartedly as dog trainers is like, if we think of if we think of operant and we define the word and we talk about behavior, it's the organism's interaction with the environment. And so when we inject ourselves, we're not training the dog. We're affecting the environment. The dog's interacting with the environment, and it's we're affecting the feedback they get. So we have some manipulative effect, but at the end of the day, it's not a direct pathway. And so that's, to me, is the way I try to think of this, and I allow that to get more broad with the bird work. And that's all I'm trying to accomplish.